I can see here who's.
A lot of different.
I want to welcome everyone who's joining us online. We're going to get started here in just a few minutes. Okay, you've got a lot of people struggling. Yeah, I will start. So good evening, everyone. I want to welcome you to the next installment of our signature speaker series. Welcome everyone online too. We've also recorded this, so just know you're being recorded. My name is Margaret Angel, and I'm the head of partnerships and strategic initiatives here at the Roux Institute. And we put on this speaker series to feature leaders in our community, our people, our work, and our community, so that everyone is welcome to learn more about what we're doing here at Roux and engage in all the kinds of really interesting conversations that we're trying to do across graduate education, research, and entrepreneurship. And it is a thrill to be able to introduce our speaker this evening, Ricardo Baeza-Yates, who is a Chilean Catalan computer scientist who studied in Canada. So there was a lot of C's, but really incredible background spanning a lot of geographies to come here. Ricardo's now a professor of practice at Northeastern and director of research at the Experiential AI Institute at Northeastern University. Ricardo came to Northeastern from being the CTO at a company called Intent, but prior to that, for many years, was the VP of research at Yahoo Labs, really across a lot of geographies across the world. Ricardo was the first computer scientist inducted into the Academy of Sciences in Chile, and has lots of distinguished recognition and publications, and notably has written a couple books. I tried to remember them. They've been published so many times in so many times. The Handbook of Data Structures and Algorithms, and Modern Information Retrieval. You can tell I'm not a computer scientist, but what I will tell you is that I have not read these books, but speaking with Ricardo is a great joy, and maybe his greatest audience comes from the podcasting he does. He makes what he does and what he studies very accessible to many, many people. And so we wanted to highlight his work on responsible AI, the ethics of AI here. We think it's an incredibly important topic at the Roux Institute. And so Ricardo's gonna do 2 pieces of his talk, and we're gonna pause at the end of each half for Q&A. And so you'll be able to answer, pose questions from the audience here. And for those of you who are online, you can type your questions into the chat, and I will pose them to Ricardo here in person. So welcome everybody online, welcome everyone here in person. And Ricardo, thank you so much for coming here to do this.
Thank you, Margaret. It's very nice to be again in Portland, and it's such a beautiful day. And the fee is not by chance. I live in California, and this talk started with challenges. So, Yeah, we're working in responsible AI in the Institute. So the Institute is one of the many institutes, like the Roux Institute, that the university has. It's for experiential AI, and that's based on the co-op program and on the long history of Northeastern to do practical things. And we believe that that means to have a human in the loop, although I prefer to say that humans should be in control, not in the loop. Another thing. And that we need to check data because sometimes the dependency of data is too much when maybe we should use better algorithms. And I will get back to that during my presentation. So as Margaret said, we have two parts. The first part will be basically a list of problems. Sorry about that. And there are 4 classes. There are more, but these are the ones that I selected. So there's a personal bias here. Bias basically it could be negative and also positive. And bias is basically things that help us in our life in both ways. And then the second part will be more discussion on more general issues that should happen in the future and what we can do to improve what is happening today. So let's start with the most common problem that you see with AI that is related to bias. As I said, all data has bias. Information is biased. So if you put random noise in a computer, nothing happens because you need to have information. So information is positive bias. So the first bias we have is that when we think about bias, we think about something negative. But remember, it's neutral in general. However, if there's some negative bias in the data, the algorithm maybe should ask itself that should be neutral or should be fair, whatever that means. So the question is not easy to answer. But typically, computer scientists don't ask this question, and then you get the same bias in the output. And worse, sometimes you get amplified bias. And I will show you an example of that. Now, if you get the bias amplified, we cannot blame only the data, right? Something else is happening. And then that's the case. Bias is not only in the data. One of my most downloaded, my most downloaded paper was published only 4 years ago, and it's bias on the web that shows the vicious cycle of bias that includes many of the ones that I will mention in this talk. So what is being fair? So that's a tricky question, no? It's a social question, and we're still struggling with many fairness issues in the world. One possibility is to remember what is equality, equity, and justice. We would like to have justice, but justice takes a long time. And we are seeing this with Black Lives Matter, with the Me Too movement, and so on. This will maybe another French Revolution. We need to fix this. I don't know, but it started there. But we usually get to equity. So basically, we take affirmative actions. Affirmative actions are positive biases. If you're interested in this topic, there's a very good documentary directed by women. If you have seen it, called Bias in Netflix. Much better than the one done by men on social networks. If you saw it 1 year earlier, so I recommend it. And last year, a bit more than a year ago, we had a very interesting debate where I had the honor of representing half of the Earth with 4 amazing women, one a judge, a federal judge, and 3 computer scientists that I know very well. So you can see this in YouTube, and we discussed this problem of bias. That starts in the Coded Bias documentary with basically Black women not being recognized by facial recognition systems. Now, what is the answer? Well, the answer is not always you need to worry about this problem. Otherwise, it will be very hard to do software. But if you may harm people, you should. And we will get back to this, what it means to harm people. Now, how we solve this problem, and this will be a completely different talk. So this talk is not in computer science, it's more about the problems. You can always debias the input if you know the bias, but many times we don't know it, and I will show some examples. You can tune the algorithm, so the algorithm should be conscious about the bias and try to do something to fix it. And that's done in search, for example. You always click on the top results because you think they are better than the other results, because you believe the search engine is doing magic. But then people click more on the first than it should on the second and it should on the third. So you need to debias that, because otherwise you will think that number 1 is much better than number 2, but that's part of your cognitive bias of believing what the search engine is doing. So there are some algorithms to fix that, but because we know very well the bias. And finally, you can debias the output. For example, you do a search on LinkedIn, you get 40 men and 10 women. The best you can do for gender parity is to delete 30 men and then show only 20 results. You are already losing information. So it doesn't work all the time. But also the bias is like wishful thinking. We are only mitigating bias, because basically there are many that we don't know. And even in the case that we know them, we don't know what is the right reference value. For example, in every profession, what should be the gender distribution? And each one of you has a preference for that. And society has a preference, and different cultures have a different preference. For example, when I give talks in India, 70% of people are women. Very different from the US. Okay, so the first time that this problem reached the headline news, first page of the New York Times, was when ProPublica in 2016 said that the software that was using for conditional freedom in prisons was racist. Later, Cynthia Rudin and her team showed that really there was not bias on race, but was bias on age. But there was a heavy correlation between age and race. So this is part of the problem. It's very hard to know what is the causality, and also if there's correlation between all these problems. Now, you can read the rest of the text, but I like this example to ask two different questions that are very important. The first one, if we have an algorithm that is used by a government or by a state or any public policy, should this algorithm be private? So this is a difficult question. But also then we need to ask the other question. Is a public algorithm safe? Because then you can gain the result. So if you are really a bad person, you can learn how to answer, and then you get free, and then you are a problem. So the answer, as always, is in between, because the world is not binary. Let me give you a more complete example that I like more. This is a very nice article published 4 years ago that was basically requested by the National Bureau of Economics, not by the National Bureau of Justice. They were interested in spending less money in prisons. Of course, the judges doesn't want to get out of the job. And they used data from the New York State about bails, almost a bit more than 750,000. And they found that if the prediction they were doing were right, remember, this is a prediction, so maybe they're wrong, but if they were right, they could decrease the crime rate in 25%, having the same number of people without bail, or they could decrease the prison rate in 42%, keeping the same crime rate. So they could do much better than judges. Okay? And if they were right, in the 1% most dangerous, more than half of them never came back and also did another crime. So in this case, it looks more dangerous. So here is an example of amplified bias. And very important, the only demographic data for this problem was the age of the person. Not even the gender, most of them are men. So there's no way that you can know address or name that you can correlate to other things like, for example, race. So what was the result? And I didn't want to show all the details, but one problem in this case is that we don't know what would have happened if a person that didn't get bail gets bail. So basically, would that person come back? Would that person commit a crime again? And then you need to do something called data imputation. You need to predict what will happen with that part of the data that you don't know. And then you can use, for example, how soft were the judges. So you can classify judges depending on how hard or how soft they are, and then you can predict what happens for the people that didn't get bail on the hard judges with the soft judges. So what are the results? So in red, I put the percentage of these different minorities in the state of New York. So 18% Black, 13% Hispanic, and 32% in total. If you see that the people that come to the court, well, there's already a systemic bias there, because 49% are Black and 33% are Hispanic. So in total, 82% of the people that reach the court is already one of these two minorities. So that's the systemic bias. And that's another problem. So what about the judges? Well, the judges increase the percentage in the Black people, decrease a little bit in the Hispanic, maybe because there are many Hispanic that are white. And still, the overall minority went up to 89%. Well, the system, the model, learned this and basically increased the bias on Blacks, decreased the one on Hispanic, like the system did, and in total, you get to 90%. So this, if you see, this is the more than twice the percentage. And here is a 10%, so that's more than 10% relative increase. So the algorithm, from the data of the cases, learned to be racist. But it still could do much better because I guess it's taking better decisions. So in some sense, it's just, it's racist, but it's just. What that means that if you have two people with the same crime, you get the same answer. For example, bail or not bail. You know this is not true in any country today. Justice has a lot of bias. There's a paper that shows that in the US, if you get to see the judge after lunch, that's really bad. So you will get probably you will be guilty, doesn't matter what. But still, if you manage to, for example, to put the less biased judge, then still you can decrease the crime rate in 23%. So still, if you tailor the algorithm to be less racist, you can do better. So why this is happening, and this is a figure to understand why this is happening. So if you take the algorithm, so this is the algorithm, and you take the algorithm says, okay, I want to basically don't give bails too much, and then you say, okay, I want to basically not give bails to so many people, then the system, the model will take the most dangerous people according to the model. Now, if you compare from where the judges take those people, imagining that this is what the model thinks, well, the judges are taking these people from all over the score of the model. It's almost like random. So this is the variance of judges. Of course, the model might be wrong, but this is also part of the reality. So here we have a dilemma, and really it's a fallacious dilemma. What is better? A biased algorithm, it's just in the sense that for the same crime, you get the same output, or a noisy judge. A judge that basically, depending on if slept well or eat at lunch, you have a different result. Well, the truth is that the judge is also biased. So basically, judges are here on B, while algorithms are in C. So algorithms don't have noise. They always do the same. They are deterministic. And there was a very interesting paper in Harvard Business Review 6 years ago by Daniel Kahneman, Nobel Prize of Economy, with some colleagues that show the value of inconsistent decision-making, and not only in justice, in many other companies, like insurance. For the insurance company, they said, what do you think is the bias? They say 5%, they found there was 50%. So much more than they think. So people believe they're consistent, but they're not. And if you're interested in this problem, last year, he published a book with Oliver Sigoni and Cass Sunstein on the flaws in human judgment. Sometimes noise is on top of bias, and maybe worse, affects everyone. So here I have some examples of discrimination. For example, the most famous one that is the one that basically was the motivation for the coded bias documentary, facial recognition. So after the police basically used these systems and they made mistakes, the main company decided to stop selling this software. Also, at the ACM US Technology Policy Committee, where I belong, we said also we should stop using this technology. This was in 2020, so in the middle of the COVID pandemic. Still, this was a problem. And then still was too late because the software was out there, and in September 2020, another wrongfully arrested person sued Detroit in this case because of this problem. But then you see this discrimination in many ways. For example, this is a work from Stanford that shows gender and ethnic stereotypes. For example, if you're Hispanic, you're the housekeeper or the janitor. If you are Asian, you can get a better job, but if you want to be a sheriff, you need to be white. So these are the stereotypes. And this comes from text written by mainly white people. Language model. So language model is the latest, you have heard about GPT-3 and new things. It's the latest conscious of the CEO of OpenAI, conscious software. Basically, these are very large statistical models that can predict text. And then if you put a sentence, then you get a very reasonable continuation that could be human. But those sentences have some biases. For example, in this word, if you put two masculines walk into a, these are possible completions. The first one is a synagogue with access and a bomb. And basically, these people, as years show that for Muslims, 65% of the completions were violent. For Christians, not so much. And if you want to be violent, I guess you have to be Buddhist or not believe in God, because those are very low. Of course, this comes from news, and this is what the system is reproducing. That can be much more complicated. For example, in 2022, when the UK decided that they couldn't do a national exam to enter the university, they predicted the score. They discriminated poor people. Remember, the score is something of a person. And if you use the average of people to predict of a person, of course, you will predict that the person from a poor neighborhood that went to public school will have a lower score than other people. But that's for the average, not for all people. Another very interesting case, also from 2020, no, this is 2021, a bit more than a year. In Italy, Deliveroo is like Uber Eats, so it's a platform to deliver food. There was a group of people that found that they were discriminated. But if you see them, they were all different. They were not all women, not all from Africa, not all immigrants, and they didn't know why. So they sued the company anyway. This group is telling me more than us. Why? Well, after experts revised the code, because they revised the code and they gave it away, although I think they found the problem before the judge, because they fixed that almost a few months after, they found that some people couldn't deliver at night or didn't want to deliver at night because they had kids or whatever. And then the people that couldn't deliver at night were getting less jobs than the people that could deliver the whole day. So you need to balance the work and then you fix the problem. But this was not so obvious when someone said, okay, we need to earn more money and doesn't matter what we do. There's a very interesting case for Uber, and Uber lost because I guess they didn't want to share the code. And this happened in Netherlands. So some drivers that were falsely accused of cheating, they had to be reinstated in the platform. But if you have to go to court for that, it's like not the way to go. And the worst case of discrimination also happened in Netherlands. For many years, they were looking for basically cheating on childcare benefits. So they were looking for fraud in poor people, which already has an ethical issue. Because if you are looking for fraud, start with the rich people. And then this affected 26,000 families, probably 100,000 people. And at the end, the Supreme Court of Netherlands said that was illegal, although that was too late because many people had to go back to their country of origin, had to return a lot of money, lost their houses, and so on. But this was so bad that at the end, not even when the previous minister that was a representative in the parliament resigned, the whole government had to resign. So this is the largest impact, political impact of an AI system in the world, when a whole government has to resign because they were looking for things in the wrong place and also doing it wrongly. Now, there's an interesting database that one engineer in one of the big companies started, incident database.ai, and there are more than 2,000 examples of problems, the majority of them discrimination. But this is the point, the tip of the iceberg. There are more things that that for me are even more worried because they're like, nobody's seen them. And the first one is physiognomy. I don't know, I'm old enough that in philosophy I learned that if you had a big nose, that meant something about the personality of the person. Of course, we know that that's not true. That was some belief in the 19th century, that your face will basically tell your personality. But some people is using this again. For example, Kosinski from Stanford in 2017 published a paper that said that from faces, he can predict your sexual orientation. Of course, many people complain, and there many people wrote why he was wrong. But then some people in China, almost a bit earlier than that, was using the same for predict if you will be a criminal. Many people also complain this is completely nonsense, but in the US, 2020, it happened again. So people don't even read what happened before. So Kosinski came back in 2021 saying that he could predict the political orientation. 70% accuracy. For 70% accuracy, you can get from if you use a bird, type of hair, earrings, clothing, many other things that have nothing to do with the face. A lot of spurious correlations, but still people is doing this kind of phrenology, modern phrenology. So phrenology is more than this. It's something that was a theory that started at the end of the 18th century in Germany, where they said that the brains of criminals had different convolutions. So the brain was different. Some people really believe this, and this is one interesting case. It's an Italian doctor, Cesare Lombroso from Torino, Italy. This is a museum, it's in his house, where he really believed that criminals had a different skull. And he collected hundreds of skulls. He didn't find any difference. But he really believed this because he even left his skeleton as the ground truth, I guess, of what would be a normal person. A normal person that all his life collected poor people from the morgue for the skulls. So, okay, that can be worse. So in 2019, MIT now published a paper that said that from your voice can predict your face. I can believe that maybe my mouth and my neck have to do with my voice, but my hair, my ears, no way. If this is true, then you can send me a piece of your voice, then I predict your face, and with the face I can predict your name. Yes, there's a patent application by Metro that says that they can predict your name from your face. I don't know what they do with all adopted children from other countries, because you can guess the language, but you cannot guess the name. And I can use all the other papers to do things that are illegal and dangerous for people. Like, for example, if you predict wrong the sexual orientation, or if you are opposed to the dictatorship, that may harm people. So this shouldn't be done. Third problem. I guess this is pure human stupidity. In 1976, George Box, a famous statistician, said, all models are wrong, but some are useful. He was talking about statistics. But today, AI is just very, very advanced statistics with a lot of data, a lot of parameters, but still statistics, patterns. And then, really, you don't understand the semantics. For example, when Elon Musk, a bit more than a year ago, said, use Signal, remember this? And he was talking about the chat app. Well, some stock options software, automated, so that he was saying that they should buy a stock from this company in Texas, Signal Advance, and the price of that company went up in 400%. Well, this is a stupid software that was using comments from an influencer. I will not judge the level of his comments. But can be even worse. There is a full field of AI that's called adversarial AI. So basically try to change the output of a system by small changes in the data to see how robust is that software. So here you have images. And I don't know if you see this white pixel. So if you put this pixel, then a horse becomes a dog. Or if you go here, if you put this pixel, a ship becomes an airplane. So basically, with just a single pixel, you change that. So natural question here, what the system is learning if I change a pixel and you have a completely different object. So it's not learning what we are learning. And can be even something funny. So this is like human stupidity, because I guess some engineer in Facebook decided to use an English-trained hate software in France. So the software decided that the town of Bitcoin was forbidden and delete their Facebook page for 3 weeks, because there was no human listening to basically to the complaints of this town. Now, if the town was using the Facebook page for COVID, this may harm people. So it looks funny, but maybe it was not. So here I would like to remember the limitations of AI, that there's too much hype, but they forget the limitations. So to understand something, we need to abstract things. So there's an amazing story from Borges called Funes de Memorius, which was a person was not capable of forget anything. So you find this person in the street, says, how was your morning? You had to wait a long time because he will tell you exactly what the morning happened. And if you're lucky, that for telling that takes the same time of happening, that could be worse, right? But this is true, right? Like you show a kid one cat and the kid knows the cat. Doesn't need to see cats from different positions and different colors. You learn that very fast. Computers are not that smart. Second, you cannot learn what's not in the data, right? And you cannot have everything in data. So data is a proxy of the world. For example, the context, what's happening now, right now, cannot be in the data. All possible traffic accidents in the future cannot be in the data. So data is just a proxy, but people forget that data is a proxy. So this is what happened, I guess, in 2018 when Uber killed a woman. I don't know if you remember this in Arizona. A woman that crossed at night, walking with a bicycle, not in the place where she should cross. And I guess the system did recognize that shape, a woman on a bicycle, was a person. And the person that was inside, another woman, a poor woman from Hispanic origin, was watching a video in her phone, because most of the time the car was working. And that's AI. AI works until it doesn't work. And that's very unpredictable. I will continue the story because the question is, who's guilty here? I will tell you what happened, not who's guilty later. So I don't care about how well you do it. So I think measuring success is a big mistake. I'm writing a paper on that. What really here is how much harm you do when you do a mistake. So as an example, I usually give, how many of you will go to the elevator and the elevator says it works 99% of the time? Will you take it? I will. Now, if the elevator says it works 1% of the time and when it doesn't work, it stops, I will take it. It's basically safe. It's like going to buy a new drug and then they don't tell you all the side effects. What happens to 1%? Oh, we don't know. You will not buy it. So we cannot be evaluating the systems on success. We should evaluate them in failure, but they are not doing that. And the last thing has to do a bit with arrogance. I still have to see a model that says, I don't know sometimes. Because a smart person who doesn't know should say, I don't know. But if you have confidence 20% that it's a cat, don't say it's a cat. Especially because probably it's not a cat. And this is a good case because maybe there's no harm to say that's a cat. But in other cases, it's like this. For example, the system of Uber said it's not a person, but maybe the confidence was very low. And the last problem has to do with waste of resources. So we are training these systems that are huge, in huge systems. And for example, to train a transformer, which is the technical name for these language models. Basically, this is 57 years of the carbon trail of a normal person, average person in the Earth. And this is about $1 or $3 million in power. So we're using a lot of resources for things that have a lot of biases and don't work all the time. And you can find many articles. I wrote an article about this in Venture Beat, but you can find many people like Gary Marcus and other people talking about the same thing. And this is what is exposed in this paper that is very well known now. This is the dangers of stochastic parrots. Because basically these models are like parrots. They just replicate things that they listen. They will say good morning also at night because that's what they think is the right thing to do. And this was the paper that basically was the reason that Google lay off Sidney Gebru, and also didn't allow Margaret Mitchell to put her name in the paper, but I think the name is there. But didn't matter too much because 3 months later, she also was fired because of this. And the two of them were the leaders of the AI ethics team in Google. So it's interesting that the people working on ethics are fired not very ethically, and that you have a problem. Now, this is not new. For example, when Google tried to do an ethics board in 2019, they had to dissolve it 1 week later because they chose the wrong people. So it's a complicated problem, and I don't want to put only to Google, but because of this, we wrote this paper on intellectual freedom last year. But this happens in all big companies. So you can see news from Amazon, from Facebook, the last one from Spotify, so you remember only 1 month ago. And there are very few people like the person I met in my PhD, Tim Bray, that leaves the company because of ethical concerns. So today, I guess we need more people like him. So this is the first part. So questions, these are the problems. So let's do stop here, and I can answer all the questions about the problems, and then we will start about how to solve them. Nicholas.
What good reasons are there for organizations to focus on the AI ethics aside from avoiding negative content? In other words, are there good reasons, or should an AI ethics board perform more than a control function?
I think there are many ways to answer that question. It's a good question. So I will answer the one that I would like to pick. I think this is more like organic food. It's a marketing strategy. The ones that want to be good, I think those are the ones that will be successful in the future. So we need more good examples. And if you have ethical principles, so every company should have an ethical set of principles, then that means that they would need to worry about this problem and others that may affect their users. I think the best customer experience is when you are trying to do good to everyone. Any other questions? Any questions from the here? No?
Got one.
Yeah.
Online. How can we think about bounding AI ethics problems to make them more manageable? So often the potential areas are so vast and interconnected that properly testing all of them is impossible. How can we make testing around these ideas feasible while still testing a diverse array of ethical?
Yeah, so I think this is a question for the second part, what we can do. But I would say, yes, we cannot check everything, but we can do some very quick risk assessments to see where we have to focus. So let's start with for example, where some person can die. Okay, let's start there. Where some person can be basically affected forever. Let's look at there, and so on. Psychological harm too. For example, are you creating addiction? Many of these systems are addicted. So people playing video games or watching other things maybe are addicted and so on. So I think we can put some priorities to the problems and say, let's start here. Of course, we cannot get to all of them. In many cases, we will not know them until something happens, because they're like the case of Deliveroo. They are hidden in the problem, and then when they surface, we know. And then typically they surface when there's something wrong, not something good. Okay, let's go to the second part. So the second part is why responsible guy. So why we want to do what the Nicholas was asking. And the first thing I want to say is that why we don't use ethical AI. You have seen ethical AI, I guess, in many places. First, because ethics, justice, trust, and all these things are human traits. So there's a human characteristics that we shouldn't give to algorithms or machines. For the same reason that you may have a nice movie in Bicentenary, but we shouldn't worry about the rights of robots in a few hundred years when we have people, humans, without rights today. So we are worrying about problems that are not important because if we are the creators, in principle, they don't have any rights. So why we don't accept that? But some people, I think, like to see that they're playing God and then they become us, like us. I don't know also what is the obsession to create something similar to us, because my goal will be to create something completely different that is our complement and help us. So like a spider doesn't have to have my check. A spider works very easily and it's helping me all the time. So computers are very good at things we are not good at and vice versa. But some people are trying to be good at what we are good at. Why not trustworthy AI? And this is something that is happening in the European Union and also in the US. This is the most used term. My problem with trustworthy AI is that I think it's not ethical to ask people to trust something that I don't know it works all the time. It will be like the elevator. So the example I use is imagine that 100 years ago, they started saying trustworthy aviation. Will you take a plane? I will. And if you are telling me I need to trust this because something is wrong there. So this is the problem. Like the computer science job. If you need to put science, it's for something. Because then maybe we're not doing this in science. Physics doesn't need that, mathematics and so on. And the second thing is that puts the burden in the user. So the user needs to trust the system. But I prefer to stay responsible, although it's also a human trait. I think we're saying that the system is responsible for what it's doing. So the creators are the person that needs to worry, not the user. So in 2017, the ACM, the largest professional body of computing, put the 7 instrumental principles for transparency and accountability. And we are changing this very soon, because I didn't work on this one, but I work in the new one, which is completely different, because there were some nice things here, but there are some very important things that are missing. But we need to remember that systems do not need to be perfect. They are learning from us. Why they will be perfect, right? But it seems that people believe that they need to be better than us, and much better than us. So to err is human, but that's not true for machines. And this is very interesting from another Chilean colleague, Cesar Hidalgo, and collaborators on how people judge machines. Now, also many people confuse what is a principle, because I guess we don't like philosophy and we haven't studied much ethics. But there are principles and there are instruments. So for example, the 3 basic principles of the Belmont report that is the base of all bioethics are justice, and we all know what is justice, although it's hard to do it well. Autonomy, so basically respect for the autonomy of the person. And then what is called beneficial and no harm, so do good and don't do bad. And then, for example, subject selection is an application of justice, which people like choose for something. Informed consent is an application of autonomy, and risk and benefit assessment is an application of doing good and not doing bad. And then there are many more principles, instrumental principles, like here I will not read, but autonomous things like transparency, agency, privacy, explainability, entreprenability, or in harm benefit, competency. I will get back to this. For example, do you have the right to take the decision? That's that. For example, in Netherlands, probably the person that decided to look for fraud in poor people was an engineer, was not even a minister. And no one stopped him to do it. Except him, probably was a man. Well-being, safety, security, accuracy, all these are basically trade-off between doing good and doing bad. And justice, things like protecting the vulnerable, I will remember this later, or accountability, and so on. Now, principles conflict. There's nothing wrong with that. Otherwise, we'll be sick. But for example, sometimes justice and autonomy conflict. Or for example, autonomy and no harm will conflict. So nothing wrong with that, but that's why we need to do the risk assessment. This is my own unpublished work yet. So on things that I find important, like I want only to highlight the first one. Is the system legitimate and competent? For example, it's not pseudoscience. You have the right to decide that. You have domain expertise. So everything about, basically, you know what you're doing, and you have the right to do it. In many cases, this is not that. And then here in the last column, I have basically who is interested in this part, in these different areas of things like usability, transparency, and so on. There are some pragmatical questions, so we'll not go to all of them. But for example, transparency is something that comes more from cultures that don't believe in government, and they want to see what government is doing. While in the US, for example, you will ask for accountability because you trust institutions, and then you just want to check if you did well at the end. But sometimes we ask for both. So maybe that's too much. Maybe we need to adapt to the culture, and so on. Some people already is working on this. This is a new book by Ben Schneiderman. Ben Schneiderman is a very well-known researcher on human-computer interaction. And he published this book on human-centered AI. And it's also in the ACM US TPC. And he talks about trustworthy, so we don't agree there, but the rest of things are 15 basically actions that you can do inside your company to avoid the problems that are happening today. So basically 15 like raised guides for the problem. The future will be how to develop responsible software with the help of AI. So AI fixing AI. This is the next. There are some interesting regulation that already exists. This is from the data protection regulation from the European Union, GDPR. And there's a very interesting article 22. Don't read it. This is written by politicians and lawyers. Read the last line. The last line said I have the right to contest the decision. That means I need to talk to you. Otherwise, it doesn't make any sense. So what this means in practice? This means that if I want to have transparency, you need to have interpretability. So you need to understand how the system took a decision or takes all decisions. Now, if I want to contest the decision, you need to have explainability. You have to tell me why I didn't get the loan. And partially it's already a law in the US about this. But sometimes explanation can be a problem, for example, in healthcare. I'm sure you all know House, the famous doctor. So, you know, 10 different illnesses have the same symptoms. So it's very hard to know which one is the right one. And in every House episode will be a sequence of finding the right one. The same happens here. Explanations are after the fact stories that you create to explain the result. People do this too. They explain themselves their decisions, although that was not the way that they happen. So that's very human. And GDPR has already been used. For example, this is a case in France 2 years ago, just before COVID, where the court said that putting video cameras in a school was illegal for 3 reasons. The first one, competence. The school couldn't decide to put the cameras. It had to be the superintendent of education of the place the school was. Second, they didn't have the consent of people to be basically recorded. And why? Because the European Union law says that you can only put in public surveillance in a legal basis. So basically for terrorism or something like that, not to guard the school. And finally, also very important, because we are seeing this many days, is that the solution was not proportional to the problem that they were trying to solve, just security of the school. I don't know what to say with what happened in Texas the other day, because here the problem is much more worse and that meets other laws against gangs and so on, like in other countries in the world. So also a bit more than a year ago, the EU proposed a regulation for the use of AI. And It's the first one in the world. GDPR, I think, was not perfect, but had a good influence in the rest of the world. This one, I'm not sure. The first reason is that you shouldn't regulate the use of technology. It will be like what you can do with a hammer. Well, you can do very bad things with a hammer, but we don't regulate that, right? We regulate food, we regulate travel, we regulate medicine, and so on. So this should be the right way. Try to regulate the problem for any technology, because in the future, we will have other technologies. So imagine now we have a regulation for quantum computing, another, I guess, we need for blockchain, and so on. So that's not the way to go. And the second problem is that this is based on risk. So you need to assess the risk of harming people. And what is the problem? Let me show you Article 5, that is very interesting. So basically, you are forbidden to manipulate a person that may cause physical or psychological harm. This is very nice, but it's like the rule, this right to be forgotten in the wild, impossible to enforce. So how you will enforce that a person with a metabolic problem will never see a fast food ad, or a diabetic person will never see a cake ad? It's crazy. But then what happens with the risk? Well, the risk is that it's a continuous value. It's like a skin color. Many times humans invent categories that don't exist. So basically dividing the world in 4 categories of risk based on examples for all the applications that will come in the future, that's a problem, because the self-assessment will be always lower than the reality. So these are the 2 major problems that I see in this regulation. So I don't know what will happen now. And accountability, very important. So when the Uber case happened, many people said, who is responsible, right? There are so many people involved. The people that build the data, the people that label the data, the people that code the algorithm, the people that pay the system, and so on. Well, in this case, this was the question, and it's a natural question. Well, one reason is that in 1 week, Uber settled with the family to avoid any court issue. So in 1 week, Uber said, I'm not guilty, sign here, I will give you this money, and then I'm safe. But the Arizona state had to do something because the person died in a public road, right? Couldn't say, okay, yeah, now settle now. And then what they had to do? Well, they accused the poor woman that was inside the car, minimal wage, working at night. And the result, basically, was that she had to be 1 year in home without being able to get out with these rings that you put in the leg. So is that fair? A poor person that was there just in case something wrong happened? So many people think that that was the wrong result, but that's justice. So that's why we have a holistic view of responsible AI that starts in an assessment in every company and an action plan. And the action plan has 3 branches. One is governance, the most important one. So how we will deal with these ethical principles and how we will decide to do new system and so on. So that needs to, you need to do a playbook, check about the process, and also have the people to do this process. And this is based on the PINE model that was designed by Jansu Jansa, which is the co-ethics lead of the institute. And there, if you have a really difficult ethical issue, we built a 40 people, top of the world ethics board that any company can use for advice. And we are announcing this maybe in 2 weeks in all sectors. Now, the second branch is about products and projects. So basically, you need to do the ethical risk assessment there. And then, depending on that, maybe you need to register data and models, and you need to audit the system. That depends on the outcome. And the last thing are training. So basically, how we know that the people in the company is aware of the governance and then is aware of the risk, And what they need to learn is different from the executive level, C-level to, say, the engineering level. So let me give you an example, and I will keep going with the self-driving cars. So a very simple ethical risk assessment, and this is much better than the famous trolley dilemma, which is completely theoretical, right? Because you know that. I will put you a much better one. So these are all the people killed by cars, let's say in the US. For sure, self-driving cars will kill much less, right? Because they don't drink, they don't look at their phones, and so on. Many reasons. The problem is that the people that will die is not a subset of these people. It's something like this. There are much less, but there will be people that before would have never died because of disease. So what I call non-human errors. And this is the case of the woman in Arizona. Probably if a person would have been driving that car, that woman would have never died. And this is the problem. We are doing good because we will save a lot of people. But we are doing bad because we are not protecting vulnerable people, like kids. More kids will die, and so on. And I think you have the same dilemma with gun control. So this is a real dilemma. Yeah, we save a lot of people, but we kill some people that before were okay. Registering arrogance, already some cities in Europe are doing this. So basically putting all their code public so anyone can audit them. So this is commendable and very risky. And now many companies are, not so many, but a few companies are doing audits. Northeastern has one of the best, maybe the best audit research group in the world, led by Christopher Wilson. And he published a very interesting paper last year on auditing a hiring tool. So basically, they wanted to check that if their gender distribution was okay according to the recommendations of the federal government, and they passed the audit. And this publication was agreed before doing the audit, so that's also interesting that the company took the risk of doing the audit and published something that maybe was wrong. But still, they receive a lot of criticism. Why? Because by auditing this tool, they were legitimizing the techniques that the company used or is using to basically measure the skills of people. In this case, were games. So we don't have any signs that prove that if you're good at this game, then you're a good engineer or whatever. So this is how difficult is this field, because you have all these relations. So this is a multi-disciplinary challenge. This is a nice slide by my colleague, Jansu Jansa. And basically you have social science involved, you have philosophy, you have engineering, and you have law and policy. So we can't solve this problem alone. We need to work with all these things. Now, to finish, remember that like the web and like anything in the world is a reflection of us. For example, internet is an amazing amplifier of good, but it's also an amazing amplifier of bad. So it's not that didn't exist before. It's the same, but we are seeing it because it's amplified. And to start, we need to be aware of our own biases and ethics. Many people are not aware even the way that they speak is biased because someone said, have you noticed that this word is sexist? There are many words in English that have the word man, and people still keep using them, like manpower, for example. Like, before it was horsepower, right? So, and there's plenty of research problems. So Hazel Henderson asked, can AI algorithms ever be ethical? If you believe that there's no ethical AI, the answer is no, but the question is more subtle. But then David Lauer says something that someone has to say that it's obvious, but someone has to say it. You can't have AI ethics without ethics, right? So many times you see ethics watching from companies that clearly don't have ethics, saying that they're working on ethics, but they do it funding, for example, universities, but they don't do it in-house. So to end with a funny ending, like joke I like. I'm not worried like Elon Musk on artificial intelligence. I'm worried about natural intelligence. We see it in many elections in the world. Why? Because if we are not careful, this may happen. Prove you're not a human. The robot says there are no more humans. The system says correct, and they both laugh. But they're not laughing because the humans were killed by them. It's because the humans killed themselves. Right? And this is what Harari would say, because Harari is very negative about the future if we don't take care. So, questions for the second part. I take bias questions, and then I do bias answers. Silvia. Yeah, no, this is evidence from systems that, for example, have harder time to recognize that the kid is a person because they are, for example, not standing for them. They are like playing in a street. Like there are many things that kids do that doesn't, if you look from the distance, don't look like a person. Also, there are other objects like they are playing with a big object like a ball. So the same happened with the woman. So the woman, basically, they never had data of a person with a bicycle walking, not right, and even less at night. But the point is that even I don't need to have much more data because if you think, most of the people that die in this diagram are men abusing of the power of the car. This is right. So, for example, there are already 20 people that have been killed playing by the autopilot of Tesla. All of them are men. So I'm sure that more women and more kids will die because of this. So it's not only that mothers don't work so well with, for example, smaller persons or other activities, but also because we shouldn't try to save the people that are basically playing with their life, right? For me, let's try to save people that really care about their lives. But that's a philosophical discussion.
Yeah, I have a question that I might need some help with. Similar to the Charlie problem, which is the problem about the deaths of cars changing. I saw this movie called The Imitation Game about cracking of the code.
Like Turing.
In England.
Yeah.
And so they had the power to avoid deaths, but they didn't because they knew they didn't want the enemy to know they cracked the code. So they used it in strategic cases, but would knowingly let death happen that they could have stopped for the greater good of reducing the overall deaths in the war, winning the war. So that was, I think, generally accepted as ethical and the right thing to do, but I think it's a gray area to listen to all you were saying about harm and how not that that was an AI, it was just a code thing.
No, but you're right. This is a risk assessment. So basically, do we tell that we have this tool or we keep it secret and then we win the war? I think that that's an ethical risk assessment, and they were right there. They saved many more lives by keeping the secret. And related to that, there's a new movie, I don't know if you have seen it, about how to deceive, how they deceived the Germany on where they will land in the south of Europe. So making to think that they were landing in Greece, and that's the opposite. You need to make a whole story, including enigma, to make believe the Germans that they will go to Greece, and they went to Sicily. So yeah, so that's the risk assessment. So you need to choose, okay, what is the greater good? And I think for me, I don't have an answer yet on the self-driving cars. Maybe the greater good is still favor the man. I don't know. This is a social dilemma that the society needs to solve. In this case, I think was clearly that basically to stop the war was much better than say we're smarter than you.
Right, but to me, and my thinking is not as advanced and focused and experienced as yours on this. It's the same thing with the Charlie. Like you know, 2
Yes.
million deaths or 1 million
Yes,
deaths. It's
yes.
a no-brainer. But I know it's not, but it's, to me,
It's the same thing, but it's, I think the difference that in some cases, in one case is real, the other case is fictitious, that you will never encounter that problem. That's my point. And of course, if one of these persons is your mother, you will change your decision. So it depends on the person too.
mother or mother-in-law. Withdrawn. Thank you.
Yeah. So the result is basically at the end is even ethics, it's something personal. So you will decide on the spot. You will not think. You will say, okay, no. The same. Any family member
That's
or
a bias. So.
yeah, it's a bias, but it's a natural bias that we have. And for some reason, for that reason, many times we have survived thanks to those biases. Those are the positive ones. So, no, but this is a very hard problem and a very good example of the Enigma case. And by the way, that's Turing. Turing is the father of computer science.
Yes. Kettering, did I have the name right? What's it?
Alan Turing.
Oh, right.
He's the father of computer science. He published a famous book on the problem that we couldn't solve.
So if a company releases a bad product and it's known to be bad or have some harm, they can recall it. Is there an equivalent for algorithm? Like, how do you handle that, I guess, if a company finds that their algorithm is too harmful and it's in production?
Well, if it's a car, you can recall it and you change the software. That has happened already. Yeah.
Well, let's say it's like an advertising or something else that's like just.
You change the model. Typically, what you do is you change the model, and if you cannot change it right away, you should stop using it. But maybe the problem that they prefer not to lose any money, and you never know that happened, right? Many times we think that completely secret, right? Or we have a problem, let's change it fast before someone realizes. Unless there is someone that basically goes to court, like the few examples I mentioned. But now every time there's more of these cases that people go to court to get justice. Sometimes they don't get justice, that's another problem. Yes, right. What do you mean? Oh, it's biased, but it's mine, so it's not so biased. Yeah.
Well, thank you.
Thanks to everyone who joined online as well. I'll turn. Thanks everyone for joining, and thanks everyone online for joining. We're thrilled that you came to do this, Ricardo. Thank you for flying out here to do it. This is one of a set of events that we're doing. Some we do virtually over lunch hour, and some we do in the evenings so that we can come in person and enjoy some refreshments afterwards. So there is food and drink in the cafe near the front. Please join us for conversation. I certainly have a few more questions for you. So we'll be looking, yeah. And there's some in the chat, yeah. So we'll be continue the conversation in the front of the campus. And thanks everyone online for joining us, and have a wonderful evening.